You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Laraine Bennett, co-author of The Temperament God Gave You, offers some practical advice on how to get along with that coworker that you can't see eye to eye with.
We often forget that we think that the way I respond is the way you should respond. We just kind of, for some reason, we blank on the fact that we're all different.
Hear Laraine's insight on the various temperaments and how awareness of our own and that of those around us helps us to better understand and work with one another. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer of the Diocese.
Laraine, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Wow, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here.
No, this is fun. So you and your husband have done a lot of work in the area of temperaments and personality types and how that affects marriages and relationships. And I've found that so interesting. So I wanted to have you in to talk about kind of workplace setting type things and conflicts between staff members and so on. But before we dig into that main topic, I want to step back and what initially began your interest in temperaments, personality types, all those kinds of things. And I know those two are different, but you've written so many books on it and given tons of talks. How did you get into this?
Yeah, well, so quite a while back, my husband, Art, who is now the president of Catholic Charities, he was actually a marriage and family therapist. And he co-founded the Alpha Omega clinics in Maryland and Virginia. So he was practicing as a marriage and family therapist, and he had studied things like temperament and various different types of personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs and whatnot. But he hadn't actually applied it to his practice because from his perspective, they were mostly secular, and this is a Catholic, organization that he's working for. And but then a priest friend of ours recommended a book, and it was called Spiritual Theology, and there was one chapter on temperaments, and it was temperaments and the spiritual life. So it was a Catholic perspective. It was written by a Dominican priest, and we became fascinated with the Catholic perspective. So it was it shed a whole new light on things, and he began to incorporate it in his practice and began giving talks on it and stuff. And then we thought, wait a minute, this is a priest writing for other priests and theologians or whatever. And so why not make something? Maybe we should write something, a book that would be useful for parents, for singles, for married couples, whatever, just from the Catholic perspective on temperaments, and that's how it all started.
So what was your background? So he was a marriage and family therapist.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
He's the therapist. I'm not. I'm the writer, actually. So I've been working I was just counting it up today. I was trying to think how long I've been working in publishing or related fields, and it's been almost 40 years.
Wow.
So yeah. So actually, I do have a master's in philosophy, but that just probably helped me be a good writer. And,
I have an undergraduate in philosophy. I've always felt that. I was like, it would never give me a job, but it helped me in all the jobs I had.
Exactly.
Because you have very systematic thought and so on.
Yeah. Perfect. Exactly.
Yeah. So you guys are a great duo in that respect. He's got this background in the content, and you help clarify and winsomely communicate it.
Right.
That's what a great team.
Hopefully, but we did write together, so we had a system.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I'd interview him, sometimes he'd write, sometimes I'd write. We'd put it together. Yeah.
And so much of this work, both I would assume therapy as well as what we're talking about with temperaments, is experiential. You've experienced it. It's not like theoretical. It's not astrophysics where you maybe never experienced the thing you're studying. Everyone has experienced these kinds of things, so I'm sure that was helpful for you in contributing as well.
Oh, definitely.
So every relationship, whether it's marriage or so on, has its own challenges. Workplaces are no different. I mean, we spend maybe more time with our coworkers than we do our families sometimes. And yet we mostly think of our relationships with spouses and children and so on. Yeah. So where should we start when we talk about temperaments in the workplace? Where would we start to kind of get a general understanding of?
Well, I think an understanding of temperaments is really vital for all our relationships, including our relationship with God. So it really can affect all our relationships. But maybe I should back up a little bit just to say that temperament is not the whole of our personality, because sometimes people will say, oh, you're trying to put us in a box, oh, and you're talking about these 4 temperaments, are you trying to put us in a box and say that that's our total personality. No, it's not. And that's why we love the Catholic perspective on it, because it really is only that aspect of your personality that you're born with. So your total personality can be composed of the culture that you were raised in, your family of origin. It can be your family size, your birth order, your education. There's so many things that impact your total personality, but we're just talking about that aspect that is the nature part versus the nurture part. And so that really leaves us free, which is what we believe as Catholics. We're ultimately free to choose to follow God's will and to respond to his grace. And so we are free to respond in any different way other than our temperament. But when we know what our temperament is, it kind of just gives you an idea of how you tend to react.
Yeah.
So from birth, like, you have a tendency to respond quickly or slowly or intensely or not intensely, or maybe it's a long-lived reaction or a short-lived reaction. So that's how temperament really plays out. And when we don't know what our temperament is, we're actually more likely to respond in that way because it's just the thing we're used to,
Right.
So we just automatically respond that way. And especially in times of conflict, like if you're having a crisis at work, for example, I've done this many times myself. I'm like, I'm your poster child for the irritating coworker who responded badly. I mean, seriously. And it's because my temperament, if I'm in a situation where I'm all of a sudden, confronted with a crisis, or I might respond very quickly and impulsively.
Right, yeah.
And so that's because of my temperament. I'm not the one who sits back and let me calmly think this through.
Right.
No, I'm going to rush in there, barging in there, and like the elephant in the china shop.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So you had said that it's basically, there's a nature and nurture to this.
Mm-hmm.
So your temperament is not something you can necessarily control in terms of what category it is. Now, your behavior you can control more.
Exactly.
Okay.
No,
okay.
exactly. That's exactly right.
And I want to step back also. You had made an interesting point before that I think is worth fleshing out a little bit. You had said that there's a Catholic perspective on temperaments. How is that different from maybe some books that are secular in nature, or I don't know if there's like psychological study that's secular in nature versus Catholic? What is the difference maybe between the two, or what does the Catholic side add to it?
Well, one of the things I think that is important about the Catholic perspective is that it does overtly acknowledge that you are not trapped in this box. You are, this is only that tendency to react, sort of like the way you're hardwired, from birth, and you're free to respond, and in fact encouraged to grow in virtue. And that's what we want to do. We all want to become saints, ultimately. We want to become holy and closer to Christ. But we need to kind of recognize that we have certain strengths due to our temperament, but also weaknesses, and the areas that we kind of find most difficult to grow in, like the virtues that are most difficult for each of us, are often related to our temperament.
Yeah. So what are some of the main types of temperaments that someone might see in a coworker?
Well, okay. So in our books, I have to say, we use the words choleric or choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic. That kind of just goes back.
I've heard those before. I don't know what they mean, though. I'll be honest.
I'll have to tell. I'll have to tell a story. But
yeah,
should I tell a story now?
Please,
is that okay?
Absolutely. It's your show.
Okay, that's so nice. Anyway, so this is a fun fact, and this is great that I get to share it with people. But it's Saint John. I don't know if he was a saint. John Paul I.
Okay.
Was he a saint? Pope John Paul I?
I would assume so, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, he was the one who was only in office for 33 days.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if he was or not.
So, well, anyway, Pope John Paul I, he wrote an essay on the temperaments. And
wow.
Yeah, and he titled it A Letter to Hippocrates. So, and he talked about the 4 different temperaments, and he gave them each a test. The same test. And the test was a sheer cliff. And they were supposed to climb this cliff. And so the first temperament, the sanguine, he goes, awesome, a cliff. cliff. I've always wanted to be a mountain climber. I'm going to climb it at once. And he charges off. This is going to be so great. And he gets in for about 40 minutes. And he's like, oh, man, this is way harder than I thought. Because I didn't even bring any hiking shoes with me. You know what? I don't think mountain climbing is my thing. I think what I've always wanted to go on safari in Africa. That's what I'm going to do. And then the second temperament that comes along is the phlegmatic. And the phlegmatic goes, he looks at the cliff and he studies it and he gets his maps out and he kind of like measures the angles and the trajectory and he's like, maybe if I start here, it might work. And maybe I need a double rope, and I'll go off and buy these things that I need. And he takes copious notes, and about 2 weeks later, he sets out he's like, I don't know if I can make it, but I'll try. And he does. And then the third one is the choleric. And he goes, obstacles like this are made to be overcome. This mountain is going down, and he attacks it like it's his mortal enemy.
Right.
And then the last one is the melancholic. And the melancholic goes, are you insane? Nobody could climb this cliff. Do you want me to break my neck?
Oh, interesting. It's funny how you can see people in yourself. There's some ones that you mentioned, I'm like, okay, definitely not that. And there's others like, I gotta slice it out in my personality or my
I know,
my
isn't it fun? But he came up with that, and it's just like, I just love the story. And
that's a great story to illustrate the larger point.
Yeah,
very cool.
So back to the coworkers.
Yeah,
you can kind of see how it can play out in an organization.
Mm-hmm. So when you see those traits in a coworker, whether you get along with them or not, you see those traits. How do you work with those personality types efficiently? Do you just keep it in mind as you're communicating, or are there like practical things you can do to help improve relationships with people of different temperaments?
Exactly. So one of the key kind of principles, guiding principles, is that, and I think it's because of original sin, but we tend to think, and we know this isn't the case intellectually, but when we're in the middle of a work, environment or something, we often forget that we think that the way I respond is the way you should respond. Mm-hmm. And so we just kind of, for some reason, we blank on the fact that we're all different. And so we enter a situation expecting the other person to respond in a certain way. When they don't, we ascribe their motives as coming out of ill will or some malevolent intention, or they're just bad, or they're wrong, instead of thinking it's a different type of reaction. Mm-hmm. So, as an example, like I used to, a long time ago, in San Francisco, I worked for a publishing company, and I bring to my editor this brilliant piece of work that I've done, right? Absolutely brilliant. Hand it to her, and she's like, "This is terrible." I'm like, "What? Terrible is brilliant? Are you kidding me?" And she's like, "No, you used a comma here. It was supposed to be a semicolon, and you said who instead of whom." And any number of other grammatical errors you can't even write. I'm like, no, wait, you missed the whole big picture. You missed what I was writing about.
Yeah.
And I'm feathers extremely ruffled,
Right.
So, but really, and then I have to say, I did not react well in that situation. I just got angry and flounced out of the room and,
right.
made a, fool of myself. But in fact, where she was coming from was her detailed perspective. So she was what we would say a melancholic, and also maybe a choleric. And so she's very detail-oriented and very opinionated and very blunt about her opinions. And she didn't look at the big picture, like what I was writing about at all, or even do the little, the what's the poop sandwich thing, where you start out, you say something nice, and then you say something, say something nasty, and then you say something nice again, But she isn't that type of person. She's not going to be that type of person, and she just never will be.
Right.
And I needed to kind of learn to grow, to accept criticism, and to realize that we're working as a team.
Right.
And really, ultimately, it's not about me, and it's not about her, but it's about the organization that we're working for, and we're trying to further the mission of the organization.
Yeah.
We're trying to do good for whatever the company we're working for. And so it isn't about me, and I shouldn't take it so personally.
Yeah. And I think so that's a great example, and let's dig into that one a little bit more. So you've got this boss who says, oh, this is no good,
right.
and then they cite fairly small examples of why it's so terrible.
Right.
They don't have some it's not like the main theme or your
right.
hypothesis was ridiculous and self-evidently wrong.
Right.
So as an employee of that person, it would be important to, one, take it with a grain of salt when they say it's terrible, and then ask questions that help illuminate what you really need to know.
Exactly.
What do you like about it? Okay, you're right. I'll correct those things so that they feel the confidence in knowing that you've listened to them and heard what's wrong and you'll fix it. Is the main messaging good? Is the theme that I put into this proper? Is it, all the other things that are factors other than just small grammatical points?
Exactly.
Because I've worked with people. We should clarify, we're not talking about current work experiences.
Oh, my current work experience is excellent. Yes, disclaimer.
I have the same feeling. People might not even believe it, but it really is. But I've had experiences where you work for a boss who's like that, and I realize it's not that they don't want to give me the information that I was looking for, which is both what's good and bad. They just give you the bad so you can go fix it. The good doesn't need to be fixed.
Right.
It's like, but what did you like about it? What's helpful? Do you want me to do this kind of thing again? I just had to learn the right questions to ask because their temperament, as you're saying, wasn't going to be providing that without a little bit of tugging.
Exactly.
So I could pull that out of them. They were not unwilling to give it. It was just not their instinct.
Exactly.
To provide that.
And then, unfortunately, when you have two temperaments clashing, like me at that time, I just kind of flew off the handle.
Yeah.
Because but that was not the right way to respond. That was not being professional.
Right.
But I should have asked the questions. But actually going back and then looking at the corrections that the red ink kind of things.
Right.
I realized, we're way better together as a team.
Yes, that's a good point.
I need that person. I need that person with the detail, the sense of detail, the eagle eye, catches every little tiny error. It's going to make the end product is going to be way better.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was watching recently a documentary on Bill Gates and how he built Microsoft and all these things. And his personality, it's a lot about his own personality and really more temperaments, which in a minute, remind me to ask you the difference between personality and temperaments. Okay. I know that they're different, but I was listening to the way he responds to things and the way he thinks, and I got almost like a point where I was kind of envious. I was like, man, I wish I thought like that, or I wish I had that temperament essentially in what you're describing. And I realized the fact that I don't isn't necessarily a weakness. It just means I need Bill Gates style thinkers around me to complement one another. If you fill an organization full of people like you, there's going to be enormous weaknesses that you can't compensate for.
Exactly.
Especially if your temperament is kind of hardwired into you.
Exactly.
So how, if there's a small business owner or whoever, what do you recommend they do to ensure that they hire people or have around them people within projects or so on that round them out? Like, how do you seek it out? Should they do personality tests or the temperament test? Would that be helpful? Or
that could be. There's also the Strength Finders test. You've probably done here.
Yeah.
I know Art has at Catholic Charities, and that really aligns closely with temperament.
Yeah.
So you could match that up pretty well. So that's really helpful. But I think people sort of naturally gravitate to work in the area that suits their temperament, or at least
Right.
Maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time it does.
Right.
So you'll often find sanguines in social media, in marketing, sales, and then you find the melancholics. They're the real hard-nosed editors, and they've really got that attention to detail.
Right.
And then cholerics, of course, are running the business.
Right.
You sometimes have the thing is, as we all mature and we grow in our experiences and our education and so forth, we actually take on the virtues that we need, to go forward, because we are not stuck in our temperament. And that's the thing.
Right.
So you will find some of the greatest leaders are phlegmatics, because they are the servant leaders. So not all leaders have to be cholerics. You could have the sanguine is your charismatic leader. and the melancholic would be your noble leader. That's, we think that all the temperaments can be leaders, but I think you do tend to gravitate towards certain types of activities that you find personally a little bit more fulfilling. And so,
Because I was thinking of this in a context. So this will create like a work style thing. So I assisted with the cathedral construction project in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was overseeing the audio and the AV system and the IT, telecom, and security. So I'm dealing with tons of engineers, electricians, people who are very detail oriented, obviously, very technical thinkers. They're not necessarily like positive or negative. They're just kind of like objectively looking at things. But when you're designing a system for the cathedral, you have to have a mind for what's the big picture? What are we trying to accomplish here? And I found my role in project leading that was to help the engineers and help the audio consultants, basically, acousticians is what they were called, to see what are we trying to accomplish. We're not just trying to accomplish the technical requirements of the system.
In front of you.
Are we creating the effect that we want? And I love the balance. That was a great example for me of the balance of temperaments, because I brought a temperament where I don't have the technical knowledge they have, nor the patience to actually study and understand it. I needed to understand it to a certain degree. But the gift that I brought to it was understanding the big picture, remembering what we're trying to accomplish. Their gift was really like the editor, grinding through every period, crossing every T and dotting every I, and it worked out wonderfully.
Which you need.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's and they need your understanding of the big picture, because they'll forget. They're like just looking at their little box. Right. So same thing as, exactly. So it's so interesting how all the different temperaments work together. And there's a quote from St. Catherine of Siena where she was talking to God in the dialogues, and she said, why didn't you just give each person every natural virtue that they needed? Just give it to us. And then he said, well, then you would be lacking in charity, because you would not have need of other people. And so we're meant to be in community. We're a communion of persons. We're not just an isolated individual, although it seems like society is going more and more in that direction. We're all splintering apart. But we're meant to be a community of persons. And so we're meant to work together. And so you bring the big picture, and the other guy, he brings the detail, the small stepping stones or whatever that needs to be done for the cathedral and the big project. But we all need to remember to keep our focus on the project as a whole, or the mission of the organization. And
you make a great point about charity, and that recognizing someone's weakness should be a point of charity, because you have one too. You might not even see it. Often we don't. It's like we like to focus on our strengths, weaknesses, whatever, right? But that it bringing together the right group helps. But if there is a lacking, it isn't necessarily a weakness. It's just you have to capitalize on the strength and fill that void with somebody who has that skill set. I could understand in a workplace where people of goodwill would come together, balance each other out, and it all goes perfectly. Doesn't always work that way. Of course, we should show each other charity. Sometimes you're going to be working with somebody, though, who is not of goodwill, and they're maybe mean-spirited, they may be aggressive towards you, and treat you rudely. What recommendations or advice do you have for somebody who's in that kind of situation? Where should they start in understanding the person to hopefully blunt the edge of that sword a bit?
Outside of going to HR.
If it's to that level, right.
No, I think in the past, like when I was younger, I would say I was very idealistic, and then also very impulsive, as I mentioned, personality or temperament wise. But I think I would have like immediately sought to resolve the situation. It's like, this has got to stop. This is wrong. I must end this, and I'm taking action now. But as I reflect on some of my mistakes in the past, I've realized that many times I did not have the full picture. And I was just like looking at it. I thought I was being objective and that I was right, but I was not. I didn't have the complete picture. And now as I get older, I realize there's a lot more gray area, and there's so much more nuance. And so actually a priest friend told me once, he gave me this great advice and said, whenever you're angry or even if you think you're, justifiably angry, it's a, righteous anger.
Right, right.
This is a moral injustice that I must solve right now.
Crusading, right.
Yes. Even in that case, take 3 days, like Jesus in the tomb. So you go 3 days and you pray for those 3 days and see if it doesn't resolve. And kind of amazingly, when I've done that, something will happen to either shed light on it that was way different than I had thought, or it resolves somehow without me having to be the Joan of Arc or something,
Yeah. Yeah, the emails I regret in my professional life, I guess in personal too, were not ones that were thoughtfully written over a period of time.
Right.
They were the ones I, in a moment of heat and passion, just said, "All right, they need to know this." Click, click,
Right.
click, click. That doesn't work out typically,
doesn't.
or it can go badly at least.
Right.
Your husband is a great example. You two together, as I'm hearing you describe like how you're the hard charging.
Oh, gosh.
I remember we had a meeting one time. We were discussing what to do, and I'm kind of like you, where it's like, okay, let's make a decision right now.
Yeah.
And he said, let me think about that.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this awkward pause. I'm like, yeah, I guess that would be a good
Guess we
idea to stop
could
and think about it.
Like, really?
There
Does
was
one
no
do
reason.
that? Does one do that?
Right. It's like we were dangling off a cliff. We had to make a decision
Right.
at this moment. It was like, I just felt like we should impulsively decide right now. And he said, no, let me think about that. And
Well,
get
that
back
was
to you.
like
I was like, wow, okay, that's that's a great little balance here. It was kind of a humbling moment.
He's kind
I
of
realized,
teaching me that, like after we're been married for so long. But yeah, it was like a source of contention, and that's an example of where it's not ill will on the other person's part. It could be temperament. And so when we're first married, I'm like, oh, let's go out tonight. Oh, I have an idea. Let's go to the movies. No, wait, let's go out to eat. Where do you want to go? Do you want to do Chinese? Do you want to do maybe a picnic? And Art's like, what's the matter? Why don't you say anything? You don't want to go out? Great. You don't want to go out. Are you mad at me? And it's like,
there are so many couples listening to this. And they're like, oh, I remember that fight.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And then we found out about temperaments and was like, oh, this explains everything.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of conflict just
and again, it helps us be understanding of where someone's coming from, that they're not necessarily ill-intentioned.
Exactly.
It's just this is not how they're wired to be, and you can't expect them to be different than their stripes. What is the difference then between temperament and personality?
Right. So temperament is just that one aspect of personality. So the personality is like, we often describe it like an umbrella, and there's all these different, aspects. There's the culture, your family of origin, your education, your birth order. There's so many things that would be impacting your total personality, plus the choices that you make, the free choices that you make.
Right.
And then there's your temperament. So it's an aspect, but it's not the whole of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not trying to put people in boxes. We're just saying that aspect of where you tend to react in a certain way, and it often is that aspect, though, that gets us in trouble because it is so ingrained.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is grow in virtue and expand our skill set or whatever, however you want to put it. But so, for example, like a sanguine, being impulsive, they tend to, get very interested in things very quickly, but then they drop it. Equally quickly can drop their interest in it. And so what they need to work on is the virtue of perseverance.
Right.
So that is that's going to be the most difficult virtue for them, but also the most important for them to try.
And that's where they would grow in holiness then too.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they have to pray their way through that.
And they once said, I think it was St. Ignatius of Loyola, who's definitely a choleric saint. Initially, he got in fights, and I think he even spent time in jail. I really think he was rabble-rousing and getting in fights and stuff. But anyway, but at the end of his life, they said, oh, he's such a meek and humble man. Well, it's like you wouldn't have known that he was that choleric. But from the way he was, as a young man, he changed because he grew in virtue and he became Christ-like, which is what we're all supposed to do.
Right.
Right. But it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, what made you want to write books on it? Obviously, you're a writer, so that's kind of when you go to the hammer, you look for nails. But you've written how many books on that include
3 on temperament. So
yes,
I only
you've got
have,
them here with you. Let me
I
see.
have 2 of them here. Temperament God Gave Your Spouse. Temperament God Gave Your Kids. I don't know if you look, I can do this, but my show and tell. I don't have the first book with me, and I also don't have our last book. The last book was on listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is another thing. It's like, I think sometimes I joke that art suggests these books to me so that I'll learn how to do something. Because I'll have to do the research and the writing and, and the struggling
You're on
through
to his
this.
game.
What, listen? You mean that's something I should do? Anyway, but he's good at listening. I need to listen better.
There's any number of topics that you and he could have, jointly written about, but you really focused in on, temperament, emotion, personality, those kinds of things. What was it that made you want to dig that deep into these issues?
Well, originally it was because he had the therapist background.
Right.
And so it kind of it fits right in. He actually, and then I found that article or that one chapter in that book, but he then began using it in his practice. And that's where people were like, wow, this is life-changing. Like they would say, because couples would come in fighting, and then he would say, well, maybe it's a matter of temperament. Let's look at it this way. Instead of thinking it's a huge, awful thing, and he's terrible, he's bad, and she's, mean, or whatever it is, what if it's just temperament? And what it does is it allows you to kind of forgive the other person and be more accepting and understanding of them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know what? They're not doing that on purpose. They are just that's the way they are. And it's not to be excusing horrible behavior.
Right.
But if it's just a temperament thing, then many arguments, many conflicts will just kind of melt away.
My wife and I have even noticed this where especially early in marriage, that you have these sources of contention, which are where you're different, right? Where your personalities or temperaments don't align. And as you work through them and understand the other person, that very thing becomes the strength of the relationship, is that you're well-rounded. It's like puzzle pieces fitting together.
So true.
Well, if you've got the puzzle piece turned backwards, it's not going to fit. You're going to try to smash it together. It's not going to work. But if you reorient it, it now becomes how you round each other out and as a couple become one. I mean, I loved how just seeing that. We've been married 9 years, and just seeing how that can work together is very cool. There's lots of work still to be done, of course, but it's interesting to see that what was contentious is now actually unifying.
Oh,
and
that's
where
great.
we strengthen each other.
So you're working as a team.
Yeah. And it also comes up like when we've taught Conference for the Engaged, the very first session that we taught, we had to cover the topic of money and finances. And when we talked about that with people and how, if I was left to my own devices, I would be, eating TV dinners off a cardboard box, but I'd have, hunting and fishing equipment worth thousands and thousands of dollars. So that's where I would orient. My wife, on the other hand, would, spend money very differently. We would have decent furniture. So we balance each other out. We have fun, and we also have the things that a family should have.
Yeah, right.
Clean clothes and furniture and so on. But but that can also be a source of contention for people where they're fighting about what I want to do and I want to do. But if you find that balance and how you complement each other, it can then be very fulfilling. And I've learned things from her, and she's learned things from me in that process. That's very cool.
So true. And the same thing in the workplace.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We just have to put aside we have to not be prideful. And the thing about temperaments is understanding temperaments is really you're growing in self-knowledge, which then leads to humility.
Yeah.
So if we can be more humble, and I know I need to, do this more every day, I have to remind myself, because temperament, you just fall into it. It's like that, it's like a channel that, with the water is going through. It's just so easy to go down the one that it's already going down.
Established too, right?
It's established, right? So we just have to remind ourselves, all the different ways of responding, all the different temperaments are all important to the team and to the mission. of the organization. We're all contributing.
I think if you oversee people, this is especially important. This is important for you and your counterparts in a job, but it's really important if you are overseeing a team that the work that fits the temperament is assigned properly, and that also when you have an open position that you have to hire, in that interview process, you're looking for the temperament you don't have, right? What do we need more of?
Yes.
Do we need more melancholic or choleric? And finding those people, because it's easy just to look at skill sets and experience and say, this person will be great.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have to get along in the interview, and that's a factor. But also, just do they have the personality type for this? That's especially what I do with communications. That's critical.
Communication.
An editor is not the same personality type necessarily as a writer or a multimedia person or a manager like me or whatever. So it's interesting to see that play out in a managerial context as well.
Sure.
Do you all have any book ideas for the future? You can give us a scoop on any concepts that you're hoping to delve into in the future.
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have had a couple of ideas, but so far we haven't
pulled
dug
the trigger
into
with
them.
the publisher.
Yeah, right. And part of it is it's such a process with publishers nowadays. It's like it's like you got, from the time you sign the contract, you got 6 months, and so you better be prepared to be writing like crazy,
right.
to get meet that deadline,
So if people want to buy one of your books, this is a fascinating topic, and whether it's to work on your own relationship, coworkers, your kids, whatever, understanding temperament's good. Where can people go and get your books, you and Art?
They could either go to our publisher's website, so Sophia Institute Press. They have 2 of our books. We have Word Among Us. We also have books at our Sunday Visitor. But easiest way is just Amazon.
Okay, great.
If that's okay to advertise Amazon.
So it's Art and Laraine Bennett.
Yeah,
just
Art and Laraine Bennett, and we've got a whole bunch of books.
Wonderful. Well, when you write another one, please come and share it with us. We would love to hear about it. You and Art are very gifted, very talented, and you've taken that charism that you have and that balance of your 2 temperaments and really made it a gift to the church. And I'm so grateful for it, and grateful that you came here and told us some of your story as well as offered some perspective on things for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. This is wonderful. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.